G'day everyone, I am the man called Kemosabe, the man with the plan from the land down under, and this is my review of Mary Boys, written, illustrated and, unless I'm mistaken, lettered by Karl Stephan. Mary Boys was funded on the Indiegogo platform and released in two 28-page issues. As usual, I'll talk about the cover, the content of the book, and then I'll talk about the good, the bad and the ugly of this comic. The cover falls into the category of pin-up art piece. It doesn't really show anything that happens in the comic, but it hints at elements that will become familiar as we read the book. The stories focus on and location at the church, the boys' penchant for alcohol, and there's somewhat limited weapon selection. It is nice to see a cricket bat in action, it's been far too long. The content of the cover is unusual and cartoony, but the art is good enough that if I saw this book on the shelf at the comic book store, I reckon I'd take it down and give it a closer look. The trade dress, the issue number and the logo are kind of jarring against the grayscale artwork. They literally look like they've been slapped on over top of the art, which I suppose they have been. All of that aside, this is a beautiful cover. Stephen is an amazing artist. The level of technical display on the ink-washed church and the ability to merge the cartoony style of the Mary Boys themselves with the hyper-realistic background speaks to a master artist. And have no fear, unlike Marvel books, the internal art is just as good. It is consistently good. The book begins with the Mary Boys surrounded by a bunch of hoodlums intent on doing them harm. The boys narrate the story and tell the readers drinking makes them faster and stronger. They trounce the thugs and recount the events of their busy day, which mostly involves inflicting violence on the deserving, and helping a little old lady cross the street. Remember her, she's important later on. They return home to the local church and receive a call from the Pope. We meet their splinter, their de facto father and leader, Father Parish. One of the Mary Boys, Harry, the other boys are named Charles, Philip and William, notice a trend, relays the content of the call, which was the Pope telling the boys yes to something. We don't know right now what that is, and it doesn't seem to be revealed by the end of the story. Father Parish then launches into a retelling of the events that led up to the current time. He details the way the town fell into despair, which he blames on a move away from community and towards large-scale shopping centres and superstores. The large chain stores forced the smaller community stores out of business, which led to an increase in crime and violence. Father Parish was a victim of said violence and after a failed robbery ends up bleeding on the floor, and that's the end of Book 1. Book 2 starts with the father waking in hospital. He is discharged with a head injury that leaves him with visions of another life, knowledge that he shouldn't know, and superhuman fighting abilities. He happens across aborted babies dumped in a trash can behind a family planning centre, and hears the cries of some infants still alive. He takes the babies to a hospital where they are diagnosed with a condition that causes deformations, such as hairlessness and enlarged feet and hands. The doctor says the babies have little chance to survive, so Father Parish sneaks in at night to give the children their last rites. When he is happened upon by a security guard, the babies leap up to attack and debilitate the guard. Father Parish flees with the infants and begins training them in his newfound combat skills to help in the fight against Armageddon, ground zero of which Father Parish believes is the hometown of Basham. As Father Parish finishes his reminiscence, the police show up, and the Mary Boys fight them off and escape in a car, heading off to an undisclosed location. The book ends with a group of street kids painting a huge mural of the Virgin Mary on the side of the police station. The same youths supply a light for the old lady from the beginning of the book so she can smoke her joint. After smoking the joint, she grows a satanic goat head and descends into the void beneath the city, and Book 2 ends. First things first, the art on this book is amazing, second to none. You can tell it's a real labour of love and it is very nice to look at. Art like this is why creators choose to publish in black and white. There is nothing colour could do to improve this art. If anything, it'd be a downgrade. Every panel is masterfully crafted, merging realism with cartoonish exaggeration. The good guys are as much caricatures as the bad. Stephen's use and understanding of black and white to create visual elements that tell a narrative and contribute to atmosphere speak of an artist who is very comfortable and well versed in this medium. Despite how ugly much of the content is, the rundown city, the rubbish and debris and malformed faces of the protagonists and antagonists, it is also pretty to look at. You can spend time exploring the art and the tones in each page and panel. This art isn't mere utilitarian fare designed to convey a story. This art is art. This is art that belongs as much on a wall as it does on the pages of a comic book. With this art, Karl Stephen has guaranteed I'll be back for anything he creates in the future. As an Australian of British descent, I have a deep fondness for Fair Britannia. Tea and scones and the Union Jack have a special place in my heart, and while we lambast the whinging Poms for being whinging Poms, most of us has some fondness for Her Majesty and the place our great-great-great-grandparents probably hailed from. We voted against becoming a republic twice in favour of remaining in the Commonwealth. I hope we do so again should the matter ever come up. That being said, there was so much to enjoy, so much that was familiar to me. The Australian psyche is so heavily influenced by the British. White Australian identity couldn't exist without it. Much of the slang and way of speaking, the cadence and tone of the dialogue is instantly familiar to an Aussie because of our British heritage. I think that the amount of BBC programming that was broadcast on our own government-funded ABC station also instilled a further shot of the empire in us. I would wager that as a nation that hasn't fully broken away from England like America has, and since whatever degree we have broken away from them came about peacefully rather than via a warring revolution, most Aussies have a closer kinship and a fonder view of the English than our American cousins. I believe with that comes a greater familiarity of the English. Every panel of every page, especially at the start of the first book, had elements that a white Australian over the age of 30 would likely recognise. Slang and imagery that makes us feel proud of our convict heritage, such as it is. I guess what I'm saying is that unless you're British yourself, or in the uniquely familiar situation Aussies descended from the English are in, this stuff might not hit home as closely as it does for us. And that's okay, but it was familiar and welcome and instantly endeared me to the book and to the characters. The action is fun and cartoony, violent without being serious, somewhere between the 60s Batman show and a Looney Tunes cartoon. This book falls into the same trap I see so many crowd-funded books land in. Huge flashbacks. In fact, out of the 40-odd pages of story, I think 12 of them are flashbacks. That's a full quarter of the book. This has happened in nearly every crowd-funded book I've read over the last 2 years. Some level of flashback or recounting events is to be expected, but it's not strictly necessary. The 88 Batman movie had about 2 minutes of flashback explaining what happened to make Bruce Wayne become Batman. By comparison, in Batman Begins, Bruce isn't seen as Batman for the first half of the movie. The 60s Batman show, which is how the public largely remembered Batman before Michael Keaton and Tim Burton helped redefine the character, so far as I know, never mentions the death of his parents as his motivation. In fact, his sole motivation seems to be a driving desire to see justice done in any situation. This came through in his speech and in his actions. He didn't need Bale's 40-minute trek across Asia and ninja training school to convince us of the kind of man he was. He didn't even need Keaton's 2-minute daydream, and I doubt anybody would claim West's Batman was more nuanced or well-acted than Bale's. So did Bale need 40 minutes of backstory? Do the Merry Boys need 12 from 40 pages of their book to recount how they were found and trained? Could these 12 pages have been put to better use? What's happened in Merry Boys is there is some amazing, beautiful art hung on really about 3 scenes of action. The boys fight in the park, receive a phone call, listen to Father Parish recount their life story, which they've already heard before, so we know it's for our benefit as the readers. This fact is even lampshaded when the boys complain they've heard the story before. Then the boys escape the police and the book ends. We know little about anything except how Father Parish got the boys and the fact that he's trained them to fight against the end of the world. Nothing really happens in the book, a couple of scuffles and a short car trip. There hasn't been significant world building. A lot of questions are left unanswered, and if it wasn't for the art, I don't know that I would necessarily be back for a second campaign. How much better is Logan as a character now that we know his name is James Howlett, and we know his exact relationship with Sabretooth? How much better off are we with a very specific timeline of the events of his early life? Did knowing about Rose and working in the lumber camps and his feud with the cook make you like Logan anymore? Or did it limit the character? Did it put a stop to whatever headcanon or wild adventures you might have half imagined for Wolverine and replace him with a very specific and even more mundane set of immutable events? I often believe knowing more about the past of a character is a mistake. I'm not saying have a character be a blank slate, but I am saying that Wolverine wasn't improved as a character by knowing these things. He's not any more interesting, nor does it make me like him any more than I did. I don't want to buy his books more than I did beforehand. If anything, it limits what can now be done with the character. Not as much as it would with a short-lived character. Wolverine's long lifespan gives writers plenty of scope for all sorts of adventures and stories, but what did Origins achieve aside from presumably selling well? I reckon origin stories are a bit like Stephen King's claim that whatever you see behind the door at the top of the stairs in a horror movie isn't ever going to be as terrifying as climbing those stairs and opening the door itself. Once you see the monster, no matter how terrifying it is, no matter how good the special effects are, you can start to deal with it, you can start to accept it. Your brain can start to admit it is what it is and begin to cope with that revelation. No reveal of a monster has ever lived up to the hype, the build-up of the threat it represents, the terror it creates. I reckon the same is true for most origin stories. It happened with Arrow, it happened with Savage Dragon. No reveal of a long-standing mystery is ever as satisfying compared to the grand heights we had built up in our own heads. When creators lead with the origin, when they dedicate so much of their book's real estate to lengthy origin scenes, they are very rigidly defining exactly who and what their character's story is. Would Logan have been a better character if his adventures and life stories were told chronologically? Would he have been as popular as he is? Of course not. Almost every article that talks about his overwhelming popularity mentions it was his mysterious past, among other things, that endeared him to readers. When you lock down exactly what has happened to your character and who and what they are, you limit storytelling options. You limit their ability to grow and become something that the readers will truly love. I see it happening more and more lately. I was talking with some mad lads about why this was so common, beyond the idea that first-time creators fear that in a limited page count they won't have the space, skill or time to create a sympathetic character. It's like creators heard Zach's dilemma that readers want more background to the Jawbreakers and their powers, and went a full 180, over-explaining the character's past. It happened in Lone Wolf, it happened in Englewood, it happened in Amazon's Black Ghost. Tonic Mole's Saving the World was a fun book, but the whole first half of the first book is an in-depth look at the title character's day-to-day life. It was suggested in this conversation that these creators who are making comics being the domain of the superhero, are taking their pacing from popular superhero movies where lengthy introductions and origin sequences are the norm. They follow the 3-act structure where the first scene or beat is to establish the normal of the story. The normal is usually very mundane and unremarkable. From there, a motivating event forces the character to act in some capacity. K.M. Weiland breaks this down in her book Developing Character Arcs. I consider it a seminal book on the subject and one that changed the way I think about writing. Well worth a look for $5 or so. I would like to suggest an alternative structure, one taught as part of the 7 Steps to Writing Success program. In the 7 Steps, which is a program designed to help school children write more engaging, meaningful texts, the author is challenged to begin a story with what is termed a sizzling start. A start that sizzles with excitement. Essentially, it's describing beginning the story in media res, in the moment of action, the idea that you begin the story at a critical point where the character faces adversity, what James Scott Bell calls the 3 deaths: emotional death, professional death, or physical death. After the sizzling start, students are encouraged to backfill, to give the reader some information to explain how the character got into this predicament. The 7 steps are plotted by students on a story graph. Regardless of the type or length or complexity of the story, the graph always looks the same. Here is the backfill. Do you see how small a part of the whole story that is? I challenge authors to minimise the backfill, the flashbacks and long, drawling origin stories, and give the audience more of the now, more of what matters at the current moment. Information about the past can be filled in with dialogue, hints, or short bursts of flashbacks, not rambling recounts that take a quarter or more of the page count. Backer retention and growth is the real measure of a campaign's success. Funds raised can be artificially inflated by add-ons, stretch goals, premium formats, and postage. It's the number of backers that matters. I have no doubt with his amazing art and whimsical story, Karl Stephan will increase his backer count on his next Mary Boys campaign. Now that the flashbacks are out of the way, I'll be there too.